The American Revolution.
Motivations for colonization.
Motivation was high for Englishmen because they wanted to colonize America. They wanted to have a primary profit over the colonies, and they wanted religious freedom. They were also very consistent with finding a new place to be able to settle and grow in.
The 13 original colonies.
The original 13 colonies were divided into three sections: the northern colonies, the middle colonies, and the southern colonies. The northern colonies consisted of mainly Puritans. The southern colonies had various religions, including Quaker, Catholic, and Jewish. The southern colonies were mainly Anglicans and Baptists. In the end, the 13 original colonies were Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, South Carolina, Maryland, New Hampshire, Virginia, New York, North Carolina, and Rhode Island.
Navigation Acts of 1651.
The main focus of the Navigation Acts was the Dutch. The Navigation Acts were acts of the Parliament intended to promote the British Empire. These acts restricted all trade to England and decreased the amount of foreign goods that were imported. They required all trade to be carried in colonial or English vessels. These acts eventually resulted in the Anglo-Dutch War in 1652.
Salutary neglect.
Salutary neglect is an American term that refers to the 17th, 18th century British Crown policy of avoiding strict enforcement of Parliament's laws. This was law that was created in order to keep the American colonies to remain obedient to England. They used this law to get used to the idea of self-control.
French and Indian War and English debt.
The French and Indian War was a war that was being fought between Britain and France. This war was being fought over self-control over land with the Native Americans as an ally. The war lasted for 7 years before Britain was announced to be the winner. Due to this war, Britain was left in debt, which led to an increase in taxes.
King George III.
King George III was the ruler of both Britain and Ireland from October 25, 1760 up to January 1, 1801. When King George was just 22 years old, he took the throne. He was England's longest ruling monarch before Queen Victoria. The reign of King George lasted for 59 years straight. Under his rule, the British had a successful outcome on the seven wars. He also ruled Britain through the American Revolutionary War, the French Revolution, and the Napoleonic War.
Proclamation of 1763.
Under the Proclamation of 1763, colonists were unable to settle on or past the Appalachian Mountains. This was done to avoid conflict with the Native Americans. The colonists were angered by this because they felt that it was limiting their freedom, and they were also angered because many of the colonists lived there.
Sugar Act.
The Sugar Act was also referred to as the American Revenue Act. The Sugar Act was passed by the British Parliament in April in the year 1764. This was a law made by the British to raise taxes from the American colonists. This law was directly pointed in the direction of the colonies. This law angered the colonists due to a 3-cent tax that was placed on imported sugar and molasses. Through this act, the import taxes were raised on imported coffee, wine, textiles, and certain colored dyes. This act banned French wine and foreign rum from entering the colonies.
Stamp Act and public response to no taxation without representation.
The Stamp Act sought to compensate for the debt that was left after the war and raise money in order to keep British soldiers in the American colonies. This act was unfair because there was a high tax put on all paper goods, and throughout this act, the freedom of speech was greatly threatened.
Sons of Liberty.
The leader and founder of this group was Samuel Adams. The Sons of Liberty was an organization that tried to protect the colonists' rights. Through this organization, the passing of the Stamp Act failed. The main goal of the Sons of Liberty Act was to get rid of taxes. Some members of this organization included Samuel Adams, Joseph Warren, Paul Revere, Benedict Arnold, and many others.
Boston Massacre.
The Boston Massacre occurred on March 5, 1770, when protesters threw snowballs, sticks, and rocks.
The Tea Act.
Through this act, the East India Trading Company gained a monopoly of tea sales in the Americas. The Parliament passed on this law on May 10, 1773. This angered the colonists because they did not think it was fair for the East India Trading Company to have monopoly of tea sales.
Boston Tea Party.
The patriots dressed as Indians held the Boston Tea Party. All of the tea was thrown in protest against tea taxations. The Boston Tea Party resulted in the punishment of colonists as well as the Revolutionary War.
Common Sense by Thomas Paine.
Common Sense was a pamphlet that was written in 1773. It directly asked for independence from Great Britain. The British government and the royal monarchy were challenged by this.
Enlightenment thinkers.
One of the American Revolution thinkers was John Locke. His ideas had a huge influence on the development, and he was the most influential thinkers of this time.
Olive Branch Petition.
The Olive Branch Petition was drafted by John Dickinson. They attempted to contend the rights of the people and colonists. On July 8, 1775, this petition was made official.
Declaration of Independence.
This document was written by Thomas Jefferson. This document tells us the reasons why independence was sought in July of 1776. There are 4 parts to this document: the preamble, the statement that states the rights of the people, the unfair treatment of kings and parliament, and granting freedom to the original 13 colonies.
Lexington and Concord.
The first engagements were the Battle of Lexington and Concord. During this battle, 51 missing, 213 were wounded, and 122 were killed. This battle was fought out on April 19, 1775.
Revolutionary War.
During this war, the British had trained soldiers, larger navies, and many supplies. The British was led by William Howe. The Patriots had Spanish knowledge of the land. Loyalists stayed loyal to the British Crown during the war. The war led to increasing differences between Great Britain and the American colonies.
Major battles.
Throughout this war, there were 7 major battles spanning from 1775 to 1780. The Battle of Long Island, the Battle of Camden, the Siege of Charleston, the Battle of Germantown, the Battle of Quebec, the Battle of Utah Springs, and the Battle of Paulus Hook.
Treaty of Paris.
The Treaty of Paris officially ended the war in 1783. The document was signed by 3 major people in Paris. Though this treaty, the Britain realized that America was independent.
Articles of Confederation.
This was an agreement between 13 colonies that served as its very first constitution. These articles were too weak to form a centralized government, they were replaced.
Constitution and why it was adopted.
The Constitution secured stately rights and guaranteed basic rights to the people. It overturned the Articles of Confederation and was able to establish a strong government.
Election of Washington.
George Washington was the first president of the United States. He was elected on February 4th, 1789. He was elected unanimously by the people. Sources.